sophisticated. There's a lot of complex things that you need to do. And so there are different solutions available to you. You could deploy by hand. What would you say some of the disadvantages to deploying by hand are? Let's say you're doing a right-click deploy inside of Visual Studio or something like that.
Miss a step.
Yeah.
You fat finger something.
Yeah. Not repeatable. Yeah.
Click the wrong button. You got release versus debug up there. Your Visual Studio.
Yeah, that's an easy mistake to make. Yeah, definitely. And how about going on vacation? Like, I feel like so often you end up in organizations, you end up with one person who's like the deployment person. And if they go on vacation, you can't go on, you can't go, if they go on vacation, you can't deploy. So there's like a, there's a knowledge lock-in element as well. So yeah, consistent, repeatable, risky. I think you covered all of those nicely. Single point of failure. And it just, it takes a lot longer to have to remember to go through a bunch of steps. It's time consuming as well. So what other options are there? You could write scripts. Anyone here do PowerShell or Bash scripts for DevOps? Yeah. What are some of the disadvantages of using scripts?
If you're deploying to a system, they might not have support. But also, PowerShell, I've never been anywhere where PowerShell wasn't locked down, especially at the domain level.
Yeah.
You have to write a form to get it unlocked.
Also, any projects I've ever been on, and maybe yours is included, and maybe it's not, but I feel like it turns into spaghetti really fast. You end up with, a script that calls this, and, or you end up with one giant script that goes on and on and on, and it becomes hard to maintain. So that's a thing. But here's a question. What if you have, let's say you've got, 5 to 4 different things that you're trying to do in your script. You're trying to do thing A, thing B, thing C, and thing B. And each of these are kind of time consuming. And you want to test just C. Do you have to run the whole thing? Like say the whole thing takes 20 minutes to run. And there's 10 minutes, and then you're trying to do this. Can you just jump in and test C?
Dependencies.
Yeah, dependencies, exactly. So I think one of the big problems that I have with scripts is that they don't take dependencies into account. So if the reality of this particular ABCD example is that you really have D that you're trying to do, and it's dependent on C, and C is dependent on A, and you just wanted to do C, all you really need to do was A and C. But because the way this is written is A, B, C, D, you can't just jump out and do it out of sequence. If instead you had organized your DevOps language in modules and specified the dependencies, then when you said, I want to do C, it would know just to do A, and it would know not to do B, and it would know not to do D, obviously. And so that can be really a powerful concept. And hey, man. And so the way to solve this has been around since like the 70s. In 1976, Stuart Feldman was like, hey, organizing your code in modules that have dependencies is a really smart way to do things. And so he came up with make. 1976. And this is roughly what make looks like. Does this look familiar to anyone? Anyone had to do this? Maybe back in school?
Earlier today.
Earlier today? Yeah, one of the disadvantages is it's Unix only. Also, it's a bit hard on the eyes, I think. I find this pretty hard to read. But it's not very cross-platform. Actually, the last I did do this on a previous project that was supposed to be cross-platform, and it was a mess. You end up with so many if statements. If we're on Windows, if we're on Linux, if we're on Mac, and so you end up with, it's not, I mean, technically you can get it to run on Windows, but it's really better just designed to run on one platform only. So in 2000, someone was like, you know what really sucks about, right? You know what really sucks about Make? It's hard to read. Let's do it as XML. Yeah. So, you know, that's another way that people have solved this problem. And yay, XML. That's great. 2000. Have you ever opened up a CS proj file? Honestly, MS Build's pretty much the same thing. So there have been a lot of attempts to solve the DevOps problem and get outside of just scripting and take care of dependencies. And in 2008, there was PSAKE, which is pronounced sake, and that is a PowerShell, an add-on to PowerShell, which allows you to define methods and put in dependencies. Same thing. So you say, I want to run C, and it knows to only run A and not B and not D. And that was nice, but it was still PowerShell, right? At the end of the day, if you go on vacation and you're the sake guy, nobody else is going to want to step in and be like, oh yeah, let me maintain that for you. That's a nice thing about what Patrick Svensson came up in 2014 when he came up with Cake. And oh, there's also Fake, which is relevant to tonight. That is the F# make. F# make is, it would be totally appropriate. I don't know nothing about it. Does anyone know? Can anyone tell me anything about it? Chance? No, because no one's ever used it. But it sounds a nice theory. But Cake is powerful because it's C#. And so if your code base is in C# and your DevOps language is in C#, theoretically you could go on vacation. Wouldn't that be nice? And someone else could maintain that code. So that was the dream anyway. There's one more way of deploying things. Well, there's two really. You can use a CI server. So any, you know, you could have, you know, all the CI servers have their own kind of language. And honestly, using Azure DevOps is kind of the same thing, sort of. But I'll get to Azure DevOps in a second. If you were doing something like this, are there any disadvantages to using a CI server to maintain your DevOps language with these UI bubbles?
Are you talking about, you can get, is it vendor lock?
Vendor lock, yeah. Yeah, there's the vendor lock element. And then another thing for me is, and this is a problem in both Azure DevOps as well as if I were to use a Travis or whatever, any kind of CI solution. There's the vendor lock-in, but also you can't run it locally. In Azure DevOps, you want it to run, it has to run up on Azure DevOps. If you write the code in the Azure DevOps YAML files, you can't run those YAML files locally, you just can't. And you can't debug them. And if there's something just a little bit wrong, often you end up, you know, as a DevOps guy, you know what I'm talking about. Like you have to wait like 10, 20 minutes just to make one small little change and see the results. And that can be really frustrating. It's so nice when you can have all of that code. Well, you're doing scripts, so not you can run locally. But when you're doing things like this, if you can't run it locally, it becomes very hard to debug. So yeah, vendor login, not hard to debug. Also, not source controlled. Well, mostly. At least it doesn't generally live in the same. I guess if you're doing YAML files, they'll live. You can have them live in your same repository. And there's the running locally. So all of these things Cake was supposed to solve, and does. I think it's a wonderful tool. So Cake it can look two different things. This is kind of roughly how it might look. Task, clean, does, and then you've got a Lambda, and then you can do some stuff. Here's a task which is dependent on clean. So whenever you run this task, it runs clean. And then there's a Lambda, and this doesn't look very much like C#, does it? It's a DSL. It is actually C#, and it gets compiled as C#, and it's strongly typed like C#. And this was the original way that cake file was written. But as of 2 years ago, because the last time I gave this presentation was before cake frosting had been released, there is now a new way, which is just purely C#. I'm going to show the two different ways that you can use cake. But I'm going to go back and forth in this presentation and using this lightweight DSL syntax and going into cake frosting. So cake, it's debuggable. In other words, you can set breakpoints and you can actually have the compiler stop and you can take a look at variables. You can find variables, you can look at them, you can change them. All of the wonderful things about C# debugging experience you get with cake. It's also cross-platform and actually is cross-platform. It will run in Windows and on Linux, and most of the commands that you're going to run will run in both places without any if-defs, without any if, x, else, kind of logic. And that's wonderful. It's also open source, as one would expect in the Microsoft world these days. And here's the cool thing. Oops, I talked through all of this. Add-ins. It has add-ins, and it has a lot of them. If you want to do Kudu, or you want to do something with pull requests and TFS, or you want to integrate with Active Directory, or on and on and on. The list of plugins is huge, and they have a facility where if you create a plugin, you publish it, then it'll go up to NuGet. So all of the cake plugins live in NuGet. Pull them down, and I'll get into that in more detail. But it's kind of like a high-level overview of cake. Let's get into some more of the details. So I talked about there's two different ways of doing cake. There is the original way of doing it, which is the DSL tool. And so that's going to look like task with a lambda and this, sort of lightweight syntax that looks a little bit C#y. I mean, you can do var. Right on here, line 5, I can say var x equals 5, and it would work because it is C#. But you can alternately now choose cake frosting. And this is your public static class program with main. And this is going to look a lot more like your traditional C# project. It's got a CS_proj file. And you could run it with these build.ps1, build.sh files, or if you want to, you can just run .NET Build or .NET Run. And it's just a independently runnable command line. So these are the two ways of running it. As far as getting started, if you want to use the DSL, you need to install a .NET tool. So .NET new tool manifest and .NET tool install cake tool minus version, I guess. And that will get you, that's the instruction, the official instructions. And once you do that, that gets you the ability to run cake from the cake tool. That gives you the DSL. The alternative is, if you want to do cake frosting, .NET new install, cake.frosting.template. So that gets you the template that you can use, and then you can run .NET new cake frosting, and that'll create a brand new project. I'll just show you how that looks. There is official guidance. I'm going to show you cake frosting first. So let's. No, what do we call it? Cap area. Cake DSL. And so now I can do .NET new frosting. Oh, I think I have to actually run these commands on this machine. So .NET new small. Is this too small? I should zoom in. Back of the room? It's okay? Good enough? Oh, you've already installed. Okay.
Did it just uninstall though?
Oh, it looks like it had an older version. Was successfully uninstalled. I don't know. Let's just try the .NET. Install. There we go. All right, so we got a build.sh. So nod to the fact that this is cross-platform. You open that up, and really all it's doing is a .NET run. Same thing with the PowerShell. All it's doing is .NET run. So inside of the build folder, there's a CS proj file, which looks just like a regular .NET thing here. And then in program CS, they give you a whole bunch of crap that you don't really need. But you can I think PowerShell, you have to allow unsigned, or you have to do that thing, which I guess I've not done on this machine. All right, so what this did a .NET run here, and so that went into main, and it instantiated a build context, and then it went down to here, task, and I'm going to go through all of this in a little bit more detail, but basically it hit the default task. The default task is dependent on the world task. The world task was defined up above, and so it did the world task, and then it said waiting, and yeah, did it not say waiting? Oh, because we didn't pass it a delay. So there's a way to do parameters and stuff like that. That's getting too far too fast. I'll worry about that later. So that was how to do the cake frosting. Honestly, at this point, if I were you, I would go with cake frosting. It's a personal preference, but I love the fact that I can load it up in Visual Studio and I get all of the tooling that works so nicely with the full C# language. It's more verbose though. So you're taking on a little bit heavier of an approach with this versus the DSL. But 6 of one, has to have a half dozen of another. You can open it in Visual Studio, and there is a cake extension, and the cake extension helps. It doesn't really give you IntelliSense if you're using the cake DSL. It will if you use cake frosting. And it's a bit old, but there is a task runner integration. So if you open the task runner, you can see all of your cake tasks directly in the task runner. And that's nice. Visual Studio Code, however, has a really nice cake plugin. And if you're going to do, especially if you're going to do the DSL version of it, it works really nicely. So I'm going to do a quick how to get started using the cake DSL as an alternative to. So let's do a cap area DSL cake. I want to show you how much easier it is to get started with the DSL. So because I have the plugin, I can just cake install the workspace. There it is. So cake install workspace says, what would you like it to be called? We'll call it cake.build. Do you want to install the bootstrappers? Yes. Do I want to install the cake config file? I don't know what that is, but yeah, sure. I can actually do what it is. I can tell you, but do you want to install the dependencies you need for debugging? Yeah, do all that. And then boom, it was that quick, that easy. And I can now jump on in here and run.
And this is the tools.
Yeah, this is the tools version. And so, yeah, so when I open up the PowerShell, you're going to see that what it's actually running here is a tool restore. I was expecting it to run. Oh, right, you don't do that way. Yeah, you just run, you run .NET. Well, normally you run .NET Cake and it runs, and I don't know what I do. I have it installed on my other machine. I'm just going to jump right ahead because I don't need that. So the things that you get from the plugin, you do get syntax highlighting, you get IntelliSense, you also get integration with all of the commands. You get a whole bunch of commands. You get debugging. Oh, and the task and the integration with the task runner too. So yeah, if you do tasks, run task, it'll show you all the tasks that are defined. So that's kind of nice. I'm going to skip over this. Has anyone read this book? Anyone? All right. This was my favorite book that I read in college. And the reason was it taught you the language scheme in a way that was really fun. It just showed you tiny little statements and said, what does this do on the left-hand side? And it give you a chance to think about it, but it wouldn't actually explain it. All it would do is just give you a little problem and then tell you what the solution is. Then you turn the next page. It's like, what does this do? Like, I don't know. You never told me that. But you can kind of figure it out from context. And the entire book goes on and on that way without a single lecture. It's just like, just how does this work? And you kind of think through it and it kind of logically makes sense eventually. And it just adds in small little increments. Lovely way to learn. And if you are interested in functional languages, I love the language scheme. It is like Lisp, except it is just a little nicer.
So it's kind of platform. So you have a question and then we have a solution. To that, you try to figure out the way to find a solution.
Yeah, you don't forget though. I mean, it all builds on itself. So I'm going to do it right now. I'm going to do an example of this. So are you ready? What does this do?
Looks like it's going to whatever call information, which kind of seems like a print to the output to terminal.
Do a login for Hello Cake.
What's that?
The printout at Hello Cake, isn't it?
Yeah. Exactly.
And then run target is main.
You're exactly right. Yeah. So run target is saying, I want to run this task. Task says I'm defining a task called say hi. And what it does is it does what's inside the Lambda, which is basically console.writeLine of hello cake, and it logs at the information level. Ready for another one? Oh, yes. So there, that's how it actually looks. If I were to run build.ps1 right now, it would just say hello cake and look just like that. All right, how about this one? What's this going to do?
Test task and a compile task. Starts running test first.
That it will first try to run test, but that depends on compile. So
Yeah.
And compile information from before.
first print compiling, then print testing.
Yep, you're both right. Yep, that's exactly right. Yeah, so it's gonna run target. We'll try to run test, but test is dependent upon compile. So it can't run this here. So it's gonna go up here. It's gonna run compile. It's gonna print out using the thing that we learned last time, is going to print out the word compiling. And then only now that its dependencies are resolved, can it actually do what it was originally asked to do. And so then it'll print out testing. So compiling, testing, and two separate tasks. All right, ready for another one. We're going to learn about arguments. What's this going to do? I highlighted in pink here what's new and wanted to point out that there's a minus target. Actually, the new syntax for this is minus minus. So it's minus minus target equals compile.
So it looks like it's now set up to accept command line. But, oh, but you got a bar too.
It will only print compiling.
Oh. Variable takes the saying, hey, I'm going to take an argument
Right, right.
with the name of target dash target, I guess. Well, what the default is.
Did you not run the default because you asked for the.
Oh, I didn't like what to do.
Yes, yes. Right. So, yeah, first thing, it runs target. And what is target? Well, target was defined up here. It's a variable. It's just C#, right? So var target equals argument. And this argument thing is saying, there's a thing called target here. Its default value is default, but we're not doing anything with the default value. We're specifying that the target is compile. So the value of this variable up here, target, is going to be compile. And so when it runs this, it should run compile. So I think the answer should be compiling. Woo. All right. Makes sense? Ready for another one? What happens if we just leave that off?
Testing.
Yeah. Does that make sense? Yeah, because I already gave you the answer in the last answer, but yeah, the default value is the second parameter there.
Keep them simple. I feel smart.
All right. Okay. This is an easy one. This is a hard one. Anyone ready for a challenge? Honestly, I don't even remember. All right, let's think through it together. So we're saying that we have a target and target's not specified. We specified that the type is string. And so what is the default value for a string going to be?
String it usually. Or is that all?
I think null. I think the default value for string is null. That's my gut feeling. So if target is null, then when we run target, if we pass in null, I bet this is going to give us a null reference exception. Close enough. Yeah, it definitely gave an error. All right, cool. All right, looks like we have one more. Then we'll okay, yeah, and then I'll leave you guys alone for a minute. What do you think this is going to do? Notice the difference here. I didn't specify the type. I didn't specify a generic parameter here.
You have the same result as the previous one.
What's that?
It should give the same error as the previous one.
You think it would give a null, basically the null reference exception kind of thing? The problem is that we used var. And var needs a type, right? So the first times that we did this back here, because we specified a default value over here, that default value was a string, right? So it could use type inference to infer that var was a string. The more recent time where we did it like this, there was no default value. And so it didn't know what value var should be. It could, or it knew because we explicitly told it. But I believe that here because we didn't specify a type and we didn't specify a default value, so it couldn't do type inference, it's actually going to give us a type error. And so here we are, the type arguments for method cannot be inferred from the usage. And I wanted to bring this example here specifically because I wanted to point out that even though this doesn't look very C-sharpy, it's still very much C# under the covers. You still have to have types. It still behaves the same way that C# behaves. So. Oh, it looks like I must have thrown in one more here. So I lied to you. Let's see if we can figure this one out. So this one says, I don't know, what do you think this is going to do?
To print B Smith.
You think it's going to print B Smith? Yeah, I think you're right. Because the target here will be default. So we know it's going to run default. It's going to print out in user, and user is default value of null, but we specified it over there. So yeah, B Smith. Cool. Okay. Yeah, I guess I did this presentation a long time ago and I just kept going. So you're going to learn all kinds of interesting things. How about this? With criteria, what do you think that's going to do? With criteria says, I only want to run this task if this is true. And so this is giving you the option of now saying some tasks, I want you to, generally tasks, I always run them. But in this case, I only want you to run this if the user value is not null or empty. So if it's got a value, because we didn't specify it over there, it's going to be null. And so this is probably not going to run. I would expect that when we run the target default, which is dependent on prereq won't run, and it's only going to print out the word default, and it will not print out the word prereq.
It's dependent.
Yeah, right? It's confusing because it says it was
Saying, hey,
dependent.
well, I'm going to but I need to do prereq. So what is going to information default?
Oh, sorry. Why does it go into
Task default? I need prereq. Is it dependent upon? It needs to run. Okay, so it successfully runs. It just doesn't do nothing.
Yeah, it skips.
It doesn't type prereq.
Right. It skips it because the criteria was not met. So yeah. So again, this points to some of the power of the way that you can think differently about your code when you organize it into these, in this case, tasks. Not only can you specify dependencies, but you can also say, I don't want this task to run under certain conditions. This is a little bit more rare, but it does become really powerful and helpful sometimes. All right. Go just a little bit further. Let's see. What is this code going to do?
It's going to get the existing working directory, put that there. Right?
Yep.
It's got to print the working directory string.
Yep.
Yes, it's going to say, hey, I'm a directory because we're getting.
I think you're right. Yeah, that sounds good. Yeah, so it'll probably print cdev cake demo, and then it will probably print, well, it could be a string, but I think you're right, it's going to be something else. It's going to be called a directory path, actually. So this is important because if you were to use C# normally, there's a directory info. Everyone knows directory info, right? Info and directory? Been a while, yeah. But I mean, if you interface with the file system, you're probably using directory or directory info, but this is something different. This is called a directory path. And this is really a critical element to the way Cake organizes its code. It allows you to have these directory paths which can compose each other. You can plus a directory path. So you could have a directory path at cdev cake demo, and then you could do plus You can do another piece of code after it, and now you've just combined those and using the equivalent of directory.combine, but you can do it just with a plus. So they give you a whole bunch of helper methods for doing file system level things. All right, I think we're getting out of question and answer. Maybe that was getting a little bit old. I want to point out that there are different debug levels: debug, verbose, information, and error. And if you get into cake at all, and you start wondering what's happening to your errors, you want more of them than just information and error. You have to specify an additional parameter at the command line just to get your debug and verbose. So that would be minus minus. By the way, some of these screenshots are old. It's now with .NET Tool and with cake frosting, it's still minus minus. So it'd be minus minus verbosity equals, in this case, verbose. Now it's going to get that line, and that line. So you can do different log levels. And you can do verbosity equals diagnostic, and that's going to give you absolutely everything. So when you start organizing your code in Cake, I find myself having a whole bunch of code like this. I have a subdirectory, and I have a subdirectory, and I have a file, and I'm just plussing them all together. And generally I have one file which contains all of my directories. And if I need to change a parent directory like sub, I'm changing it in one place and it cascades down to all of my other places. And that's a really handy way of organizing your directories and your files. And there's a whole bunch of really handy little extensions like file exists, delete file, and directory exists, create directory. You just type kind of what you expect. The documentation is very good. You can do a lot of file system manipulation very easily. All right, so that was kind of the basics. I'm going to get into a little bit more of the specifics. And if you want me to speed up or slow down on any of these, I'm happy to do so. Yeah, you got a question? Stretch it. Clean directories. Anyone familiar with the ** syntax?
Yes.
Yes? Love it, right?
It can go add.
Too bad. Yeah, it can. **, in case it's a Linux, I think it's originally Linux. I don't know.
It was heavily used in AND.
And yeah. Yeah, ** says, I want you to recurse through all of the directories. Basically, this says, go to the current directory, go through all of my children directory, and anytime you see a file called bin, and anytime you see a folder called obj, I want you to go and delete everything in it. It's a really lovely, concise way of just cleaning out all your bin and obj directories. That's a really nice little helper method that can save you a lot of space. That kind of thing can be really handy. The equivalent, by the way, if you do that in cake frosting, looks like this. If you were to, you have, everything's just a little bit more verbose in cake frosting. So yes, it's C#, but now you have to have a parameter inside of all of your methods. You have first of all of your tasks defined from a frosting task. And in order to start writing code, you have to override run. There's also a run async. So everything is async based if you want it to be async based. And then you were given an IK context, and the context has all of these extension methods on it. Everything is extension methods in cake frosting. So you type cake.net clean, and it's like, I don't know what you're talking about. Oh, do you want to use cake.common.tools.net? Okay, now I know what you're talking about. I'll give you all the extension methods which are related to .NET. So now you can get .NET Clean, .NET Build, .NET, test, all of those different commands. So that's the equivalent of doing that in cake frosting. There's an old MS Build. Does anyone still use MS Build? Just out of curiosity. MS Build fans? No?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I see.
Azure.
Yeah. Once you get up on this, let's say you get up on your CI server and you're running on your CI server. MS Build there?
I will tell you a short story about that later.
I believe you. I believe you. There's all kinds of horror stories about that. If you'd want it, if you needed to, if you ever need it, you can instantiate it with an MS build command. Hopefully you don't need it. All right, how about, let's see. Oh, right. So the equivalent in cake frosting is context.net build. And that's the equivalent of running dotnet space build space myproject.csproj. So that's how you can do that. Equivalent in cake frosting. If you need to restore NuGet packages, that becomes pretty easy. You run .NET. Actually, this is deprecated. Remove the core. You can do it, but the correct way to do it is .NET restore. Anyone ever needed to restore packages from someplace other than NuGet?
Like your own repository.
Yeah. So, I mean, you don't generally have to type dotnet space restore very often, but if you have a private repo or a library in Azure DevOps world, then sometimes you need to get in and run your own .NET restore commands. So that would be how to do that. What's really nice about it, though, is when you're on a CI server, if you don't have NuGet.exe available to you, this will automatically download NuGet.exe for you, and just it knows how to run it and do it for you. So it does some work behind the scenes. If you've ever had to download NuGet.exe, it's just one more thing that you don't have to worry about in the cake world. Oh, this is a great tool. Anyone familiar with Git version? Anyone familiar with the problem of trying to figure out what version number to stick in your packages? Yeah, right. That's a real pain on a server because it'd be so nice if it could just figure it out. Well, that's what, if you use semantic version, that's what Git version will do for you. It can just automatically pull out the appropriate version for you. Here's roughly how it works. If you put a tag of v0.2.0 into Git, and you ask Git version to pull out the version for you, it will figure out, it'll go back, look through all of Git, and it'll pull out 0.2.0 for you and pull that into the semantic version or into the version variable if you're on the master branch or main branch. If you go to a feature branch and that was based off of that previous branch, and now you ask for the SEM version, now you got 0.2.1 or 0.2.1 -feature1.1 if you want a semantic version. So it's figuring it out. If you now merge that back, now it's going to 0.2.1. It recognized that you merged the feature branch back in. It went back to the previous tag and figured out, well, because something was merged in after that, I should update the minor version. Unless you put a new tag on there, it'll figure out to automatically update minor versions. And it's smart enough to also recognize that if you're on the dev branch, that you want to update, generally you want to update the minor version. You don't want to update the revision version. So when you go back to the dev version, it updates the appropriate version number in that case. So this is Git version. It's a wonderful tool. It's not specific to Cake, but like a lot of things in the .NET ecosystem, it has a Cake plugin. And that is done with tools. So I haven't told you about tools yet, but tools in the Cake world are a way to bring in not just additional functionality, but an actual additional exe file. So when you specify this meta tag up here, pound tool, and ask for the NuGet package git version.command line, and you can specify a version and should specify a version, and I'll tell you why in just a second. Then it knows to go and download Git version, and it gives you the ability to run Git version, and behind the scenes, that's in a tools directory, and it's invoking a tool in your tools directory that was downloaded via NuGet, which is really nice. So then all you do is run Git version, You can pass in Git version settings, and this is an example of something you can say update assembly info equals true. And if you do that, it'll just automatically look in your project and in the MS build file, and it will update the version numbers in your CS proj file for you. On the server, it's not going to check it in, but it's just going to update those files for you. And then when you run a build, it'll use the versions like I showed you previously. That can be a wonderful time saver. Really like that feature. Oh, yeah, so here's what it's actually doing. When you use, if you don't say update assembly version equals true, it'll just return the values. But if you do this, now it's setting the version prefix in the generated, the version prefix is all CS proj file. I should talk about pinning for a little bit. Pinning is kind of a big deal. It's really tempting just to say, oh, hey, always give me the latest version of git version.command line. What can go wrong with that?
Breaking changes.
Yeah, right. It can be a real pain in the butt when everything that had been just going along smoothly, and I guarantee you it's going to happen while you're on vacation, that someone's going to publish a breaking change in one of the tools if you don't specify a version, and all of a sudden the entire CI/CD pipeline is broken, and because of some random thing inside the details. So yes, I've given this presentation, given this advice, and not done it, and then I've broken things, and I'm like, wow, the cobbler's children have no shoes. So yes, always specify your version.
Does it accept wildcards? So 3.6 dot asterisk? If you don't.
That's a good question. I would hope so. Yeah, so you can go to NuGet. I don't know, has anyone been to NuGet in a while and noticed that there's an actual cake section right here? This isn't a fringe tool, right? Like cake is really a very popular tool, and it's used so much that NuGet even has, here's how to get the cake bits that you need. And so here's your pound add in NuGet commands. You just copy that directly over to there. Or if you're in cake frosting, you can take the second one, NuGet package, whatever, and then in your public static in main here, you call .install tool, pass it in the URI there. That's how to do that equivalent in cake frosting. And there's many, many more. That was tools. Add-ins are very similar, but add-ins give you functionality without an additional download of a exe kind of thing in your tools directory. So NPM is an example. There's an NPM add-in, which allows you to run NPM commands. And that can be really handy. What do you think this does? Any guesses? Ben, you're our Angular expert.
I would say it's going to install the NPM library. Well, NPM, this one says.
It's running NPM install.
Yeah, NPM install, yeah.
Yep. Handy thing to do. What happens if you pass in a script name?
That script.
This is like
It should be,
NPM run. That's
well, generally it's in the package.
Yep, exactly. Yep, it'll look in your package file, and it basically run npm run script or npm script, and then
NPM run.
NPM
runs. NPM run. That's
right.
Is this assuming that Angular dir.path was specified somewhere else in the script? Working directory equals Angular dir. So is that somewhere else?
Yes,
Okay, just making sure.
off screen.
Okay.
Good call. Good catch. Yep. Yeah. So yeah, if you're package.json had a build-prod with an ng build -prod minute -aot. Has that changed? I haven't used Angular actually in a while. Is that still the sort of standard command you do in Angular?
Ours is all in now. Because I don't really know what the goals are.
Right, because you don't do it on a daily basis. It's just what happens on the server. But there's all kinds of add-ins. Cake.plist.
yes.
Yeah, yeah, it's iOS, right? You can create your plist files if you're deploying a iOS app. And now you can specify your CF bundle version and your CF bundle identifier. It's just a really easy way to get into your plist, and there's an equivalent version for the Android. I forget what that file is that you have to publish up along with your Android files. But if you want to make changes to it there, super easy way to get in and make the changes to those as well. Oh, here it is. I've even got a screen of this.
Oh, there it is.
Yeah. Yeah, the code looks different, but it's accomplishing the same basic thing. We're setting the application label inside of our Android list. All right, so let's see. We covered compiling, we covered testing, we covered packaging. Oh, no, we didn't cover testing. So yeah, so for running unit tests, .NET, ignore the core, .NET test settings, .NET test, run configuration. Why do you think you would specify no build true? Any guesses? The answer is that when you run .NET test, by default, it will automatically build your CS proj file. But in this case, we are dependent upon build. And because we don't want to build twice, we don't want Cake to build and also .NET test to build. It'd be cleaner that other things might be dependent on this task. And so it'd be cleaner just to do it in Cake at this point and allow Cake to handle your dependencies for you and don't let the .NET commands handle the dependencies for you. So I would recommend if you go down the Cake path, just get in the habit of doing no build equals true to avoid double the work. Anyone ever feel like this? I do. I do a lot. My gosh, I'm doing it right, writing all these unit tests. Am I really making my day life better? Am I just spinning my wheels sometimes? I don't
95% coverage,
Right.
the contract.
Oh my gosh, is that a contractual thing? Have you really had a contractual coverage?
Big problem is the last place. All you have to do it.
Oh my gosh. That's ridiculous.
It's management.
Yeah, I mean, I guess if that's how you need to win a contract. Yeah, you can do open cover if you need to do code coverage. I won't get into the details because this is getting long. If you want to do VS test like this, again, I'm going to skip the details. Oh, getting code coverage is actually a lot easier than it used to be. If you are interested in getting the code coverage, you can now do a .NET. This is wrong. This slide is wrong. In fact, all this slide's wrong. You can do .NET test, and there's a parameter, and for a long time, that parameter was not published. But I think recently they actually updated the documentation, and you can do code coverage generation with a parameter, and now they've got that in Cake as well. So, but you do need to, if you are interested in coverage, you do need to install the Microsoft Code Coverage NuGet tool in your code. I don't know if anyone's ever tried to do this. Well, just so you know, that is a necessary thing. Then, yeah, there you get your code coverage results, and it'll generate it in a coverage file. That's how to do it. If you're using DevOps, if you're using Azure DevOps, you can then do one of these publish test results here like this with a test results.trx, or if you want to publish that, you can actually, there's a Cake command to do that too. But the end results are in Azure DevOps. You can see your code coverage numbers. Okay. And I like that it keeps track over time too. It's one of those features of Azure DevOps. Actually, just curious, who's Azure? Okay, if you had to choose between right now between Azure DevOps and GitHub actions, features, GitHub actions. Which would you choose?
GitLab.
Oh, here it is. Yeah, .NET test minus collect append quoted coverage, and you can specify the logger TRX. That's yeah. This isn't that old. This is correct. That's the right way to do .NET Core. Talk about packaging just a little bit. If you need to do code signing, it's there for you. They have a sign tool. So you can do. You don't need to do any third-party tools. Like it'll just automatically do code signing if you specify your URL file. Oh yeah, you got to specify the file that you want to sign.
Send the certificate.
I'll figure out where I specified the certificate. Back when I was doing Sign of Shame, I'm not really anymore. But back when I was doing it, then I bought this USB key from Certum, and they sent me a USB key, and I had to plug the USB key, and I had my private code signing cert on the USB key, and I think this knew to pull it off of that USB key. I think that's how that worked. Anyway, it's possible. You don't need to get into all the details, but just getting a sense of the breadth of Cake and all of the things that it can do and simplify for your life is the important thing. So yes, get PR description is retrieving information about the PR. I know why I said that. Because this looks like there's a thing called get PR description. I wish there was. I almost considered publishing it, but I just wrote it as a one-off on a project. And I want to show how easy it was to write my own plugin. If you do want to write your own plugins, they look a bit like this. Cake method alias, Cake alias category, you give it a category, you give it an alias, and then it's an extension method, right? Public static with a string with a this of iCake context. And now you can just run get PR description, or if you're in Cake frosting world, it would be context dot get PR description, and you have to remember to get the right using statement in there. So that's how to write your plugins if you're interested in doing that. Oh yeah. Anyone ever have used publish profiles? Publish profiles to publish up web projects?
It's dev scope.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So you're specifying your publish profile. So it can do publish profiles. That's how to do it. Oh. One of the relevant things that I wanted to point out about this is anytime Cake can't do what you want it to do, every single parameter has this argument customization option. And if you pass in argument customization, you can give it a lambda. And in your lambda, you can just append anything onto the command line that you want to do. So it's super extensible. If some new feature comes out on some command line tool that you want to run, you can just append your own bits and pieces for new things that Cake didn't cover in a strongly typed IntelliSense kind of a way. So that's how to extend beyond the default. Okay, come down the home stretch. Azure CLI, I wrote a really large Cake plugin. It was so large that when I submitted this, I broke the Cake tool parsing feature that they had. And Patrick Svensson sent me a message personally that was like, hey, I really appreciate your contribution, but we can't bring it in because it's too big. And I accomplished that because I did code generation, and I wrote a little script that ran through every single Azure CLI command that you can possibly run. I extracted all of the documentation, all of the arguments, all of the sub things, so you do Azure, AZ, AKS, what if you're doing Kubernetes, all of those different things, all became strongly typed cake ways of doing things. So if you wanted to create a new storage account in Azure using this plugin that I published, you would do AZ storage account create, and now you're creating an Azure storage account. You can specify the resource group and the kind and the name and location or whatever, the SKU. So this is all nice, strongly typed, and if you mouse over it, it's got nice IntelliSense and stuff like that. The only thing is, if you go look for Azure CLI, you're not going to find it when you go to cakebuild.net because there was so much code that they couldn't import it. But if you ever need to do any Azure work, this is the standard tool we use now. So that's if you're interested in the details, I did a blog post about it. Okay, this is deploying. It's doing deploying a website. Here's how to deploy a website, I guess. Sorry, it's been a while since I've given this presentation, and I didn't get this far when I prepared. So yeah, I have to sort of think through some of my slides a little bit here.
Now, is deploy website part of Cake, or is it like a specific function you wrote somewhere else?
Great question. I'm going to guess that it's part of this cake.web deploy package. So I think I specified this add-in and that got me the deploy website. So that's if you need to do a deploy website, that's how to do it. So there you go. There you go. Oh, there's also specific commands inside of Cake for every single CI tool that you might possibly be on. So if you are on Azure DevOps, it's called TM. Or if you're on, what's the version of Microsoft's build system when you're on premise? Already forgotten. Team Foundation, that's it. Thank you. Team Foundation.
They renamed it.
Yeah. Oh, have they? What's it now called?
Azure DevOps Service.
It's called, oh, really?
Yeah.
Even if you're running on-prem?
Yeah.
Well, this will be a wrong name. It's TFNM. But there is a specific set of commands. If you want to run things that are specific to a particular CI server, they have a whole set of commands just for each individual. You want to run it on, what's the Team City one? I don't know, if you want to run the Team City one, they have that. So you do build system dot name of whatever Azure DevOps is one of them, dot commands, and you can call upload artifact, and that will upload artifacts to your build afterwards. Which I use all the time when I'm doing multi-stage pipelines, by the way. So if you're doing multi-stage pipelines, the most common way I'll do that is I'll have my first stage is where I'll do my build, my packaging, I'll publish that into the first stage of the multi-stage pipeline, and then subsequent stages of the pipeline, I'll download the assets that were published during the first stage of that multi-stage pipeline. It's a fairly common pattern. All right, so that it really concludes the majority of this that I wanted to go over. I could just end it right now. If you guys have seen enough of Cake, I know you originally came here for F#, so you're probably like, okay, I was supposed to do things. But I could also show you a real world project, which I'm doing, and just kind of give you a very quick overview of the way I organized it. Or we could just say it's time for closing on out. I won't be offended, I swear.
Is that your Adreno thing you were talking about?
Yeah, this is a kind of a joke. I use this slide every time that I do anything. I did it when I was working for the Siren of Shame stuff. But when I ordered my PCB board and it came back from the fab shop, I realized that I'd forgotten to connect all of the grounds to all of the other grounds. So, so the board, needless to say, it didn't work, but I didn't want to throw away the board. And so I ended up soldering up all of the grounds to all of the other grounds the way I should have, when I should have made a ground plane. I don't know if anyone's doing any PCB design, but you need to make a ground plane, which makes everything that's not an actual bit all of the, everything that flows around there becomes your ground plane. Well, I forgot to add that, which is kind of an important thing in PCB design. If you're ever interested, I could give a presentation on PCB manufacturing and, you know, outsource PCBs to China, because that's pretty much how you do it these days. But
So, this, okay,
sorry.
so who do you see using this? K or maybe this use function?
The person who would use Cake on any given project would be the person I affectionately always refer to as the BM, who is generally myself, build manager,
Manager.
not to be confused with Bellman. It's a sort of joke, because it's a hard job.
I mean,
It sucks.
Not just you, I mean, so do you see other company or maybe other industry using this?
I would never see anyone outside of the .NET ecosystem using Cake, but I would expect someone that's using Ruby to use Rake, and that's sort of an equivalent. And there's, you know, there's some kind of equivalent ache in almost every single language. So if you're doing DevOps work, I would use Cake every single time.
Does it have options for like SQL Server, like for procedures, creating tables? And stuff like that?
Honestly, I would do all of that with entity framework migrations. It does have a capability to run EF migrations, but it does not have, to my knowledge, it's a big tool. There's a lot to it. So to my knowledge, it doesn't have anything to directly do that for you. But if you're not using, so the other alternative is if you're not using entity framework, you're probably using database projects. Remember database projects? That was a thing,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I think it still is a thing for, yeah, for legacy databases. And I think there's a Cake plugin to be able to do that, because I think I had to do it. That's the deal where it actually detects the deltas between the way you define it, and then it'll generate a script. Yeah. It's
Just like if you create a new table, you want to move to production.
yeah. I try very hard to make it work in entity framework. I try to use entity framework if I could. All right, cool. Well, thank you all so much for coming out tonight. I appreciate it.
Roller coaster. All right. Been a while since F#. What about that?
Yeah.
I told my group, I Joseph. Office, okay, yeah, I know we're all remote, but